Hello and welcome to another episode of Raw Chatter. I am your host, Vicky Midwood, and I am delighted today to introduce my guest, Kerry Willmott. Now, Kerry and I met at a This Girl networking conversation. So, This Girl is a women-only business networking group that is for people who like to network in a relaxed, chilled out, different way than all the rigidity of things like BMI and all of other well-known networking groups that are out there. We enjoy getting to know the person as well as the business. And Kerry is a managing director of a company. She is a mom of two girls, but her story and our conversation when we first met totally blew me away. And that is why I have been invited. Sorry, I've asked her to be my guest and invited her to speak to you, because this is a story of definitely adversity and advantage, but one that some of you may find resonates very, very powerfully with you and your family. What was it about Kerry's conversation that blew me away, you may be thinking? When she dropped the bombshell, just nonchalantly, that she had been paralyzed for 3 months in hospital. So, of course, I went, whoa, stop there. You need to tell me more. So, Kerry, now our listeners are wondering what on earth landed you in hospital and paralyzed for 3 months. I'm going to let you introduce yourself and fill us in on just what the heck did happen. Over to you.
Okay, well, thank you, Vicky. It was a mad old time, I have to say. Feeling a lot stronger now, but at the time really quite scared. What landed me there? A sensation of pins and needles in my feet, feeling just off, just feeling fluey, not really understanding, and I like to understand where I'm at with things, so just not understanding anything at all. Eventually, through a really busy schedule, got to the doctors, spoke to the doctor, who looked quite grey in the face when I explained how I felt. Got to hospital. By the time I'd got to hospital after a few days of this, I could hardly walk. I was dragging myself along the railings and really quite scared, but still convinced that it would be tests, medication, I'd be home the same day. No bag, nothing, no time to say goodbye to the children or anything.
At that
No
point,
idea.
had the doctor given you an inkling? Because you said he went sort of grey. Had he given you an
Yes.
inkling of what he thought was going on?
He uttered the words Guillian Barre Syndrome, which I'd never heard of at all. I'm bilingual English-French, never heard of it at all. So I
Right.
thought, well, it's not an April Fool's joke. It's not something he's making up. Doctors don't
No.
tend to do that. But just hadn't got a clue. And he just said, I need you to get to hospital. And he rang the registrar and begged them to take me in for testing.
Right. And I have to say that for people listening, Guillian Barre is how it is spelt.
Mm.
So it is something that is not that common. But the
No,
very fact that you had a doctor who suspected it was that, all kudos to him, because I know that
absolutely.
there is a lot of doctors who would not have even considered that as a possibility. But because he did, my guess is he sent you for the right tests.
Yes, absolutely. Yes. Like I say, quite scary, in a lot of pain, couldn't sit still, couldn't rest, just a really strange pain. They got me onto a bed quite quickly in the initial assessment, and it took 3-4 doctors to come to me before one of them said, "You're obviously in a little pain. Let me give you something like a sedative."
Right.
So I went on to morphine, which is, I have to say, in that kind of pain was an absolute godsend. It
Right.
just switched everything off, and I needed it right there and then.
Just help people to understand, because you're very good at kind of minimizing how much pain you were in, but just so people can get an idea of pain. It wasn't like you touching a bruise, was it? I mean, we were
No,
talking proper pain. Explain, what was it like? Was it like a burning sensation? Was it like stabbing? Can you kind of
oh,
expand a little bit on it?
it was like pins and needles, but when pins and needles, you need to stand up, stamp those feet, and get it out, and laugh and giggle a little bit. That's something that happens to me, and
Yeah.
then it goes as the
Yeah.
blood starts to sort of flow a little bit more. This was like a dull pins and needles, which was, I felt like, well, I need to move, but I've nothing to stamp out. It's just constant. It had gone into my feet, up my partly up my legs a little, and then it jumped, and it was in the back of my, as well as my feet, in the back of my above my bra strap. It was in my tongue, so I couldn't taste anything, but my tongue
Oh,
felt like it had got this strange pins and needles. It wasn't like the COVID symptoms that they talk about now. It was
no.
very odd, and just feeling wiped out, knowing you're there. Carpet felt like it was a 6 foot, 7 foot deep pile. You felt like you're walking through long grass and wobbling about, but still feeling sort of kind of okay.
Wow.
But so lying on a bed and thinking, how do I get rid of this distracting pain?
Right.
And I don't know what to do. And those beds aren't wide. They're really
Nope.
not wide.
No, they're
So
not.
just not knowing where to lie, where to turn, and everywhere was like I'd been lying on my side for days or on my back for days. That really labour intensive pain.
Wow. Thank you for that, because I think just helping people to understand what that pain feels like, because pain is such an odd one until we get some kind of clarity on what it meant. So the morphine helped you to ease the pain, and then what was the next step? So you got 4 of them having a conversation and no doubt disagreeing
They
on what it
decided
was.
they decided to admit me eventually. It was 8 hours I'd been lying there trying to, but the morphine had helped, so I didn't see some of those, and I felt bad for my then husband because he was sitting there and I had just gone to sleep because it just helped. So they admitted me, and I was in a ward. I had no clothes with me. I was sitting in a skirt and knee-high boots and normal business clothing, thinking I was going back to work, and that didn't happen. So I had nothing with me. I didn't know what to do. For my then husband, it would have been, with it was 20 miles each way, so about to go that back and forth, he would have had to do an 80-mile round trip to get clothes and everything else.
Wow.
So that made things very difficult for us. But he did eventually do that. But I was left alone. I didn't know where I was. And things were going downhill. I was getting less able. I couldn't move off the bed and go for a walk round. I couldn't go to the toilet on my own. Nurses
Wow.
were sparse because they were so busy on the ward, and it's not one-to-one. So I just sat there and I had no idea what was going on at all. No idea.
So
Just
your
more
brain
pain.
must have been, obviously, because your brain was working, but you couldn't really necessarily say anything to anybody because there wasn't anybody to ask. And I guess your thoughts were with what I'm going to say to the girls and what's going to happen and all that kind of stuff. So this is going on, and then what's the next step? How come you end up being paralyzed?
Well, I was in that ward, and then they decided that I needed more help because I couldn't move, and the nurses down there were few and far between, so they needed somewhere else. So I went up to a high dependency unit, and they hadn't got enough staff. So I was being left quite a lot, but by which time I'd got clothing and I was in a hospital gown and I was getting something, but not a lot.
Right.
It was just very difficult. And they started to do spirometry tests for my breathing because I was starting not to be able to eat food and swallow it because of
Wow.
my tongue. I'm thinking, well, what's going
Yeah.
on? So they did spirometry tests at all sorts of mad times of the day, and I got quite angry because I still felt quite clear of mind, just put out by this whatever was going on. And then a lovely lady, a blonde lady who looked to me, as I remember it, as like an angel. She turned up from ICU and said, it's time to go. And they wheeled me up to intensive care. And they said, we don't know where your bottom of your curve is. You will come up. We don't know how far the bottom is, and we don't know how far you'll come up the other side. So we're waiting for you to get to the bottom. So every day is going to get worse, and we're just watching that, which is terrifying because this felt bad enough. And I hadn't seen the girls, and we got to a week, and every day I kept thinking, I'll see them tomorrow. They'll be able to come. And they said, no, we don't allow children in here. We don't allow children in here.
So at this
And I
point,
was
while all
trapped.
this is going on, so you're kind of trapped, but your brain is working, but your body is in like pain and discomfort and weird things are happening. Did they actually put you in the picture as to what to expect? Did they give you a clue as to how things would get worse, or were you kind of just like left to just suffer the consequences and not know what was coming next?
No, it was a lot of prodding and poking, and we don't really know what to expect. We don't know we just don't know how it's going to pan out. Some people have it for a few days or a few weeks. At worst, you might need a tracheostomy, you might need life support, you might need this, you could be paralyzed. So I had a few chats and it got quite nerve-wracking. And I remember thinking, because of my upbringing, if I'm a good girl, now I was late 30s by this point, if I'm a good girl, it'll go away and I'll be able to go home. I just have to learn to behave. I just have to be good. And I was lying there thinking, I'll just lie. I won't cause trouble. I won't call the nurses. I don't need this. I'll just lie here and be a model patient and it'll go. And it wasn't. It was just the pain was getting worse. I couldn't move my feet. And then it started to be that I couldn't lift my legs, and it was climbing and climbing, and fingers were going, and my face dropped to Bell's palsy. It started, and my breathing was getting worse, and they intubated. So I had a large bore nasogastric tube. There's a not large and a small. Smaller is a smaller tube, but for some reason they put a large bore into me, which was even more painful. So all that pain, not knowing what was going on, and then them trying to get me to swallow this tube, push it up my nose and then down my throat, was crippling. Absolutely terrifying.
And was there anybody there? Because obviously the fear of you realizing that, oh my God, I can't feel my feet. Oh my God, it's going further up. I mean, where was your brain taking you? Or were you still kind of listening to that, be a model patient and don't complain? What was going on?
I was terrified. My parents are quite strict, and I wasn't wanted as a child. That has been made very clear to me. So I don't have the greatest relationship, but they decided it was dutiful to turn up every day. So when they walked in, I was in intensive care. I'd already been in intensive care when I was 18, having been hit by a car. So I felt naughty. So the first thing I said to my father was, "I'm sorry. I'm really sorry."
Whoa. So just let me backtrack on that for a second. Just because this idea, and this is really powerful stuff when it comes to parenting and what children learn from the way that they are parented. So from just that little snippet there, you learned that you getting run over by a car was your fault.
Yes.
Right. And therefore you ending up in hospital is a bad thing. Right.
Yes.
So you must be a good girl while you're in hospital to get out fast.
Yes.
So that programming was so powerful from 18 years old. So the first thing that you say to them is, "I'm sorry." And what was their reaction, if anything?
Well, there was lots of mixed reaction through the journey of my hospitaling. At one point, when I was on a tracheostomy, my father said something to me and said, "Oh, you're not looking at me." Well, I'm not speaking to you then, and I couldn't speak. So he also wheeled me to the cash point to get money out as soon as I could use my fingers, because he wanted a birthday present. So I've had a lot of pain in that through control. So my now ex-husband, couldn't cope with what was going on, so he looked after the children and was just making a bigger mess. Yes. So there was no one really to turn to in terms of anyone being around. I just felt like when I'd gone into hospital when I was 18, my then boyfriend left me because my face was a mess and I couldn't go out and have fun for a while, and he needed to do that, so he was going to look for somebody who could. And he told me that, tried to be gentle in hospital, and I just feared this repetition of negativity. So I just felt like I was putting everybody out, and I was a burden.
Wow. And the reason that I'm picking up on this is because this is really powerful and important stuff in terms of your body being able to heal, because the body is designed to heal itself. However, when it's bringing on more trauma and stress responses because of past programming and then current experiences, the very fact that your husband couldn't cope with it and wasn't there to support you on an emotional level, and the people that you would hope might be supportive, who are your parents, actually weren't, and you knew they probably wouldn't be, but it didn't make it any easier in that situation. So instead of having what everybody needs and wants when they're ill is love, security, support, kindness, compassion, nurture, you basically got none of that.
No, I had friends. Luckily, my mum said to me, "Is there anyone else you want to visit? Anyone else that you can think of?" And I sort of, there was a couple of names I was able to somehow get out. It was very difficult because I'd got a trachea in, I got paralysis in my fingers. How was I able to tell her who I wanted? But we managed. I had they gave me a board, like it was a piece of paper laminated, and it had like the QWERTY keyboard on it, which was great, apart from the fact they hadn't put a space bar on it. So it was very difficult to communicate where one word ended and another word started. But and I could only have it close because I couldn't move my arms and my fingers, and I managed to sort of just point to the odd letter, and they were almost crowding around me to see what I was trying to point. It's the only way we had. And we got some of my friends, and they were great. It's amazing what, gossip is one thing, and sometimes we see that as negative. But when you think about the friends that you have and that you love, or the loved ones you have, what is it they like doing? And that Hello magazine, who's doing what to who in the nicest possible way, in the glamour. So I got to learn about who was doing what to who through magazines. And there's a lady here whose husband's eaten her alive, and she's still able to tell the story. Those crazy magazines. But it was something else. I had no news. What news did I have? And people didn't know, because they'd see me and just go blank, or they'd have a few things. I've just been working and I've just been doing this. So I had all that. And if it hadn't been for my friends, I wouldn't be who I am today, I don't think.
Wow. But that's such a powerful statement. And I want people to really hear that, because we're living in a world now, I think, where we think we're more connected than ever before through the internet and what have you. But the truth is, a lot of us are more disconnected than ever before. And it's at times like this where having friendships that you've nurtured over years, even if you don't necessarily, live in each other's pockets and see each other religiously week in, week out, those people who are going to be there for you no matter what, those real friends just make such a difference, don't they?
They do. It's amazing what, if you can say that you know a friend and they'll do this. Do you really know them enough to know what they really like? What's their favorite soap, what's their favorite, things like that. I know they like a good gossip, not negative necessarily, but at that time, would you take in a car parts magazine, or would you take in a home design magazine, or would you take in a who's done what to who kind of magazine, or maybe something classier, but something that would entertain them, and you could just talk about something else for change that would be, just
and
normal.
This is key. This is key, isn't it? Because there are going to be people listening who have got, whether it's parents, whether it's a child, whether it's a partner, who may be in hospital for a long time, and just putting a bit of thought into what do you take them, so that the conversation isn't around what's been happening today, what tests have you had, how are you feeling, because that just keeps you stuck in the issue. And you just want your mind to come out of it and talk about the mundane, the silly, the stupid, the fun, the exquisite, the whatever. So thank goodness for friends and magazines.
Absolutely.
So did they actually tell you what Guillian Barre was, what it meant, and how you'd even ended up with this diagnosis?
Well, yes, we there was a lot of work done. We it apparently affects 1 in 100,000 people. But I now have as much chance as you do of getting it. It's not like I'm suddenly now a high risk person and stay away. It's where your body attacks. It thinks it's defending some kind of virus or something that it doesn't like, and it actually attacks the peripheral nerves and removes the myelin sheath that covers the nerve. So I suppose a bit like removing the plastic on a cable that you've got for any cable you've got for your computer or whatever, and you get this then you get the copper wires, and if they keep touching each other, all hell's going to break loose. And that's exactly what was happening to me. My mind, my core processing unit, the furthest message it sends is to my feet, which is why it started to unravel, because it couldn't get the message through. And then it normally creeps up the body, but mine had gone a bit sporadic and a bit wonky, and who knows, somebody cut on a puppet string, somebody had obviously cut the wrong string first, and another one, and that was the only way we could sort of imagine, how it was working, what it was doing.
And this is where, but what we want to kind of look at is, so where do we think that because it is such a rare thing, and it's not genetic as far as we know.
No.
So where do you think, in hindsight now, with the understanding that you have of it, that it stemmed from? Because it's not something that just suddenly pops up overnight. This was brewing.
No.
So we have symptoms that we don't even recognise often, particularly when stress is a powerful factor. And you've already mentioned some very stressful things there, like your parents let you know that they didn't want you, which is just like huge in a person's life. But where do you think it stemmed from that you should be one of those 1 in 100,000 people?
Well, as a mum, a loving mum to my 2 girls, we needed to have the swine flu jab. Swine flu was out there big time, and certainly in our area. So we were called for the swine flu jab, and they said, well, you can have it as well if you like. So I thought, great. Here's the thing. I'll have mine first, then my eldest, then my youngest, and then we'll go for sweets, because we'll cheer ourselves up, whatever treat you want, and so on and so forth. So that's exactly what we did one fine day in February of that year. And it hurt a little bit, as they do, but nothing different from a normal jab. And at the same time, I was starting to unravel the financial mess that my husband was creating in the background, intercepting mail, but bills weren't being paid, things like that I had absolutely no idea about. Just so many awful things that were going on. So I was trying to deal with that. At the same time, trying to hold down my job, trying to be mum to everybody, and it was just everything. So they don't think it was the actual swine flu jab, which incidentally, there was a case of this in the 70s in the States, where the swine flu jab caused lots of cases of Guillian Barre, but they didn't think it was that because the girls didn't get it, which I'm forever glad about.
Yeah, thank goodness.
But because of the extra stress I was trying to deal with, trying to keep money coming in, none of my money was my own, not paying into pension, all of that was all going on, and I just kept going. My body was saying, whoa, enough, enough, and it just said stop, and that's what I think it came from.
Yeah. And this is what I kind of wanted our listeners to take on board, because when our immune system is not functioning optimally, which it can't if you're under high levels of stress, we are going to respond differently to any kind of vaccination or jab or virus that happens to be around. And nobody knows what that's going to look like until it happens. And this is why we talk about, and it's very blasé and it's very glib, isn't it, to say stress is a killer. But stress is so harmful because it's a little bit like electricity, isn't it? You can't see it, you can't put your hands on it, right? But you know it's there. And it is doing untold damage physiologically. And this is the part that I think, people really need to listen to, because you were doing so much stuff. You were firefighting, basically, weren't you? Because your husband was living a separate life. He was keeping all of this stuff so secret from you. But then it started to all unravel, and you've got a reasonable job in terms of the amount of pressure and expectations that are on you from work, plus you've got a family, and then you've got supportive parents, not at all. So you can't even go to them to say, shit, this is what's happening, and to offload. So you were carrying all of this. And then suddenly it was just like, it's that last little thing that tipped it over the edge, isn't it? That led you
Absolutely.
Right. And go on.
I'd had 6 weeks, just to give us sort of a little bit more on that. I'd had, with my first daughter, I'd had 3 months off after, given birth, and had 3 months off. With my second daughter, I worked up to the due date of confinement, so a delivery date, and then had 6 weeks off. That's all I managed. So I was back in work, supporting the family, not because I was one of those go-getters and I have to do this. I had no choice.
Right. And that's so important, because for whatever reason, we find ourselves in situations where we don't have choice. And, I was reading some posts today on LinkedIn talking about, well, we all have choice, which is very easy to say if you're not in a situation where you cannot actually see that there is any other choice, because the choice is worse than you doing what you have to do. And nobody wants to make a worse choice, do they?
No.
So you want to have a quality of life. You want to be able to stay in your home. You want to be able to provide for your kids. And so oftentimes we do things because genuinely it feels like it is the only option. But then we've got to try and manage our own emotions around that, don't we? And our energy.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, totally.
And you
Yeah.
were working full time, weren't you?
I was, and when I was in hospital, my delightful boss, who had been really friendly, don't get me wrong, they weren't paying me any sick pay because our policy said it was just statutory sick pay only. But even though my special circumstances, there was no support there, so my bills weren't being paid. And then after I'd come out of intensive care and I got some movement in my fingers, he was sending me work in to support the business because they were due an audit. So I was getting translation work and all sorts of things and trying to do my best, which made me feel wanted. So I thought this was great until I got a letter that my husband brought in and that said that they were my role was up for redundancy, and basically they said they'd managed without me for 6 months. It wasn't 6 months at that point, but they'd managed without me for the time I was in hospital. I was still there, and they thought that they could still manage without me, so they wanted to consult with me on redundancy, and they came into the hospital with a HR consultant. So somebody else doing my job on a consultancy basis, and thus I suspect more money, to talk to me about me leaving the business because they'd managed without me. Yeah, so that was.
And so incredible. That is where we look back and you're thinking, and I'm not one to make connections where I can't see them, but your thought of the hospital and it being bad news and it being an ending because your boyfriend left you because you were in the hospital for, and then guess what happens? Now suddenly you're told you now haven't got a job.
Yeah.
And it's almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy because you'd already thought that being in hospital was not a good thing, was going to be a bad thing. And it turned out that, this is what happened. So you're in the hospital, you've now been in talks about redundancy. You still don't know at this point, do you, how long you're going to have to stay in the hospital for, or what is going to be your long-term prognosis? So tell us about that.
Gosh, well, where to start with that one? It was just so emotive. I'd been trying to understand all of it, just lying there, just doing things, just, learning to walk was hard and everything else. When I got that notice, I was trying not to deal with my now ex-husband. At the time I was in hospital, I learned that he cancelled my life assurance because he couldn't pay it, and the house and contents insurance. So had he left a window open and somebody broken in, we'd have lost everything. And I thought I'd lost enough as it was. So I tried not to think about that because which was easy with the pain management and everything else. It was kind of easy. There were lots of other things going on that meant I'd got things to focus on. And wow, I'm surprised because I know if something bothers me now, it will bother me until I sort it. But I couldn't get out, and bills were mounting up and people were chasing me and I couldn't deal with that. So I thought, I don't know. My ex-husband had said he would help me, but he didn't do anything. And my boss, well, I suppose we're rolling forward a little bit here because, the story of how I learned to sort of walk and everything else hasn't come out. But it came towards the end of my time in hospital as I was getting slightly better. So they'd used me for what they needed, and then they were doing this. So I went home on leave. I was able to get that from the hospital, which is ridiculous. I went home with my wheelchair. The finance head of finance at work picked me up in their car because he said, I want to help. I wheeled in, and by which point I don't know, with the limited mobility I had, especially and dexterity in my hands, but I managed to write 7 pages of sprawled notes. And I thought, if you don't let me explain this to support my job, because it was a consultancy for redundancy with this other woman, I will take you through every court in the land. Now, I wasn't in any fit state to do that, but that's how angry and hurt I felt. So I'd had a good cry. Nurses and doctors couldn't help me. The only thing they could do was try and get me moving enough to get home somehow. So I had to fight and do that. And I went in and I'd got through the first 20 minutes of my notes. And then they put me back into reception and they cancelled the whole damn thing. They just retracted everything. Take your time, get better, come back, we'll do a phase return, we'll do this. And it all just disappeared because I'm a determined sausage and there was no way I was going out, without a fight. So
Wow.
that, that was really, really difficult. But, having had to go through learning to walk, learning to eat, learning to drink,
And
all sorts of difficult, dark days.
This is the stuff that people kind of don't necessarily go into the detail of, but this is the stuff that helps people understand how you have that strength of mind and how can you keep pushing on day after day. Because we talked about you not having a choice of going back to work, but kind of in a weird way, that not having a choice actually powered you to getting better, didn't it? Because you wanted to be able to eat and be normal and to walk. And so day after day, when you had to keep on doing the same exercises and trying to do the same stuff, which I'm sure I'm going to tell us about in a minute, was incredibly frustrating and fudging hard. But you were determined, and that determination is what I guess showed through in those 7 letters of scrawled whatever, because they thought, shoot, this lady is somebody who has got something that actually we would be foolish to let go of. That tenacity, that drive, that determination to say, excuse me, no, you are not doing this. So tell us about the struggle and how actually long were you in hospital, the struggle to walk and to eat, just so that people can understand and contemplate what it must feel like to basically have lost all feeling everywhere and just have pain. To then suddenly find, okay, I've got a bit of movement now in my fingers, to now going, I want this blooming thing out of my throat and I want to be able to chew and eat and walk. Tell us about how did the hospital help you? What did you have to go through?
Oh my goodness, the hospital were fantastic. I have to say, a huge, let me choose the words carefully, big up, shall we say. I think that's the trendy thing to say. A huge big up to Derby Royal Hospital. They were amazing in the ICU department. Very difficult to make friends or to network, if you want to call it, or whatever, or to get people to warm to you when you're literally just lying in a bed and looking pretty horrific. Bell's palsy in my face, so that had dropped. So that looked awful. My legs, at one point, I thought that they were twisted and mangled, and my mind was saying they're twisted and mangled, and it hurt so much. They're like wrapped around like a corkscrew. And when you look down at my legs, they were so far apart. I looked, well, I'm sure you can imagine, but it was looked like something completely different. But my legs were just opposite ends of the bed, and we can't get them any wider. And yet all my body was saying was, no, they're twisted and it hurts. So very difficult with that. But to refresh my mouth, for example, they have like a sponge on a little tiny stick, and they wipe you. They rinse it and then they wipe it out because you get so dry. We realised that when I needed to have some liquid going back down the right tubes after my intubation, that actually, if we turn them upside down and add the tiniest drop of juice, and they're really tiny lollies, we can make lollies. So I had frozen lollies in the freezer in the ICU department, and we would just lick this gently just to control. And it was nice and tasty rather than whatever the hospital were going to try and do. Pureed food, well, don't even try and imagine what pureed meat looks like. Pureed to its finest form. But I think I wish I'd been blindfolded.
For those of you who've had kids and made your own baby food, you know what she's talking about.
Yeah, well, it doesn't look more like the stuff you put in one end. It looks like the stuff that comes at the other end. It's awful. But the taste was there. I have a background in food retail, food production. I'm advanced food hygiene qualified. And I was, this is this, how on earth are you going to get people better if this is what you're facing them with? And they then sort of said, okay, well, help us then. So they wheeled me down to the kitchens and the meeting rooms at the side of the kitchens, and we had a group session with trying foods and what does it look like and texture and everything. And what can we get away with? So the doctors that knew about textures and what could go into the right tubes and what people could swallow and how pure it had to be and what could we do, all sorts. So we explored all of that and did sessions there. And I thought, this is mad. How the heck did I end up doing this?
Well, Kerry, this is why you're a human resources person, and you're trying to make people's lives better, including your experience of getting better in the hospital. I absolutely love this. This is why I loved our conversation, because you're just awesome. So you're in there saying, "Hey, come on, sort your bloody food out, right? Make it tasty."
Yeah, we had Michael Bublé. I remember him doing some kind of show while we were in. When you ICU, you tend to have like separate rooms almost. That no door on them. You've got your curtains, but they're quite private because they're expecting in some cases end of life care. One night I had a number of nurses round the bed, and we were watching Michael Bublé. They were obviously keeping an eye on the other beds, but rather than from the nursing station, it was from my room, as it were. So we watched that, and I think it's very difficult to get swooning when you're intubated, but I think I had a good go at that, and it was fab. Soap and Glory, big shout out to Soap and Glory. The product smells really, really nice, really quite lovely on the skin. So the nurses didn't smell of TCP, because when they were moisturizing me and trying to keep my feet, just to give me a bit of, maybe we'll get some sensory feeling, maybe we won't, but let's massage your feet, let's do this after a shower, let's try and do your hands, just giving me a little bit of a massage, but with their product. My nurse said her partner thought she was having an affair because she always smelt so amazing when she came out of hospital. So we did lots and lots of positivity and things like that gave me a friendship group within the hospital to make my days that little bit better. And I used my humour. When you're trying to sit up and you've had Guillian Barre, your bottom feels like you're sitting on an enormous plate of jelly. So you sit on your bottom and you can just feel yourself wobbling from side to side. And I thought all I wanted to do was sit up and dangle my feet into perhaps some water. Well, sitting up alone was like, trying to reach from side to side to get my stability back was just hilarious. I've got a big bottom, I would suggest myself, as it was. And then you've got this jelly and it's like, oh, this is worse. But my sense of humor tends to sort of go off on one. And I just used that to try and, when you're learning with to use your face again, pulling funny faces, trying to stick your tongue out rather than doing anything, and holding the strongest side so the weakest side does the exercise, and blowing kisses. You look like some kind of nutter from a really bad dating show, but you just have to see it that way and not think, don't I look awful? More a case of, look how far I've come. But bite-sized chunks, just tiny steps, and have lots of patience. And if you're wobbling and if you're doing this and thinking, the back of my gown was open and I leaned back and the hot physio guy was behind me and they said, lean on him. And I thought, why? I'm white and I dread to think what state I look, and my hair, my roots are showing, and everything. But it was more a case of, doesn't it feel great to be able to I was making people laugh when I couldn't laugh myself, and it was really nice. I work in L&D as well. I do lots of stuff with training, people development, which I love. But it was nice to be able to see people have a good time at work as well, and just laugh and want to be with me. So that helps me.
This is such an important message, because it is hard work, and it is baby steps, and it's consistent, and it's day in, day out. There's no let up, is there? No. But if you can inject that humor, and I know I'm coming out with cliches here, but there aren't cliches and there aren't stereotypes for a reason, right? Because they're based on truth. But laughter is the best medicine, because our body elicits a chemical cocktail, no matter what emotion we're feeling. And if we can elicit more of the biochemicals that are associated with fun and laughter, they're also associated with healing. And if, unfortunately, we feel despondent and depressed and it's all really hard and I don't want to do it, then you're going to feel depressed. And you're going to make the healing process much, much slower. So the very fact that you could, and this is not woo-woo shit, this is science-backed stuff, by the way. And so if you can, think about the humor in the hardship, that is always going to propel you forward faster and make the journey itself so much more enjoyable, not just for you, but for the people that are helping you as well, which is obviously what you have an awesome knack of doing. So how long from, so if you're sitting and you're on your wobbly bottom and you're trying to get tasty food, so tell me about the walking, because that must have been flipping unbelievable to sort of slide out of your bed and try and put your feet on the floor with no feeling or just pain.
Well, I'd been hoisted everywhere. Then hospitals, you get hoisted when you can't walk. You're supposed to be hoisted, and it's a big sheet underneath. And they're great at doing that thing where they can get it's like, whoa, magic, getting the sheet under you. Well, this sheet has hooks, so it's let's get that under you. You've no idea how they've moved all of you, but they do. And then they've got the hoist that drop that they can control, and it comes down. They hook each bit up, and then you're scooped up like some kind of thing from a stork. You imagine that the stork has come to collect you because you're coming in this little napkin thing, and off you go. And that was my life for a while, sort of being anything I needed to do. We went from one hoist to another hoist to get me to the bathroom to just have a bath rather than a bed bath and things like that. So I felt like master of the hoist, where they were writing this one to this and this one to that. Come to the physio side of things, it was lots of working, lying me on a bed and manipulating my body to get used to things. Bending my knees, so feet flat on the bed, bend your knees, and they pushed them up, and then I had to hold them there, and you wouldn't believe that my body couldn't hold my knees in position. They just they went out. It was whoa. And I had to lie there, and I remember talking to my legs and going, now you stay there. No, stay. I need you to stay. And I had to really, really focus on just stay. And and eventually it did. But thinking about how you get, it doesn't matter what you weigh. It really doesn't. Now, I'm a big girl, but it doesn't. I wasn't then, because I'd lost a lot of weight through not eating hardly anything and then just feeding me whatever my body needed. But getting this top bit over these knees, and how the heck are you going to do that? I couldn't. I'm quite a logical woman, but I really couldn't get how it was going to work. How are you going to pull this up if I've got no? Oh, it was just, well, I don't, and I'd spend most of my time worrying more about, forget the bills, forget the husband. How the heck does this
work?
I'd sit and think about, and it's, your body's not used to it, so your blood pressure drops, and I'd never experienced fainting before, and until then, and I went, whoa, I'm going, and they sat me down and said, your blood pressure's dropped. So it was a little bit, and then those magical bars that you see in all of the movies where somebody, the magical bars, and it was literally, hip flexor, hip extensor, and your glutes. There were so many bits to remember. It was worse than an exam. Trying to remember them.
That learning to drive, isn't it?
Huge. 1 foot at a time, and up and down, just little bits. Oh, we've done 4 steps. Come on, we'll take it for 4 steps. I need to get on with my life. I can't. 4 steps I can't take. Come on. And yet I had to. And then one day it was, when you get to the end of the bars, just want you to keep going. So I'm sort of out with my hands, sort of, it was a real sort of bang, bang, sort of ape man moment. And I'm wobbling, and they said, you're wobbling. And I just thought, I don't care if my hips are wobbling. It's a great feeling to be. And once I'd got that hang of it, like a baby, who was a lot further off the ground, I have to say, it's a lot further falling, and I didn't have a nappy on to cushion my bottom, but it was literally one step after the other, and then I was addicted. It was a great feeling. So I was up and down the ward, and there were things, always knowing where there was something to grab hold of. And they laughed, they marveled, they just loved it, and then I get sent back to bed because, well, we know you've done 5 minutes. Come on, back to bed. It was just things like that. But me being me, when there was a nurse helping somebody in a bed, and somebody else, there was a lady diagonally opposite me that became sick, because I'd learnt this walking, I got my walker that they'd given me for extra support. I managed to get off the bed at one point, go over to her, give her a bedpan so she could be sick in it. And then we got her a new nightie out, and then we rolled the nightie so she didn't get the sick on her face, got her old one off, and put her a new one on. And I did all that because I wanted to care for her, and me focusing on somebody else meant that I wasn't thinking about how bad I was, but it was giving me the exercise and everything else. So it was about,
and I'm just going to jump in there, because
looking at other people, and
powerful.
Sure.
No, well, you just said that, looking at other people, it is powerful, because when we can take the focus off of our own problems and help somebody else, it helps us to be fully present in the moment, doesn't it? But and not in our heads. And this is where physically doing something to help somebody is oftentimes so much more powerful than you just kind of writing something down or maybe having a conversation. If you can actually physically help to make somebody feel more comfortable. And I think sometimes we forget the power of that human to human contact, and just, you know, skin on skin contact is saying, you're safe, we've got you, I care, just holding somebody's hand. And these physical gestures that we make, particularly in that hospital environment where somebody's ill, are so, so important. So you're now been in the hospital for how long?
4 months.
Wow. Right.
4 months, I think. Yes. Bearing in mind, Vicky, just to sort of go back on what you were just saying, I hadn't been wanted by my parents. I'd had rejection from a boyfriend at 18, and these are just a few of the points, you know, that I'd had through my life. And then I'd had this rejection that was coming from work. It wasn't good with me and my husband because we'd already had a lot of stresses anyway. I think it's fair to say that I craved recognition. So I wanted that recognition. So the fact that somebody needed me made me feel like I was enough. And I couldn't face thinking how people wouldn't want, with, you know, the rejection of my boss thinking I was going to lose my job. Who would want a disabled person? And we all think about these policies and the procedures, and we have to treat them fairly. But it's not just about having a ramp to get somebody into your building for an interview or giving them extra time. They believe that the chances are there'll be some that will say, well, I have a right and I'm going to exercise that right and I'm going to go through the law if you ignore me. But there are other people like me that felt, no one will, if I lose this job, they don't want me. No one's going to want me because I don't feel like I'm ever going to get out of this. I might have a bit of a wobble or a bit of a stumble, or I might walk with a stick, and who's going to want me? And I felt like, how the hell do I jump back into work and save my children? I craved that. You know, it was the recognition that I think helped me through, just getting someone to like me and do that.
That's a powerful thing. Brilliant. Thank you for sharing that, because we always, I think there's a tendency for people to be so kind of binary in their thinking that craving recognition is somehow a bad thing. But actually, it's not. You know, if we can get away from this black and white, right or wrong, good or bad thinking, just across the board, it would be so helpful. Because in that situation, if you hadn't had that as a driving force, I'm not sure that you'd have been able to endure all that you have and still have a sense of humor and be a good mom and be excellent at your job. But because you have had all of that rejection, instead of you deciding that you weren't good enough and you weren't even going to bother trying and becoming a victim, you allowed that to propel you and be your flame, if you like, to ignite the power and the passion, to have your cravings met, to have your needs met, so that you could step into your power and your purpose, which you kind of already knew that you had, but you just needed to have the validation that you are worthy and you are good enough. And the very fact that you recognize that you could get that from helping other people. Yeah, it's no surprise, I don't think, that you do the work that you do in the job that you're in and that you've got as far as you have, because it's innately in your nature. And you are, I think, one of the few people I know who's kind of stepped into the world of work, into the job that they were kind of born for, without knowing necessarily that was actually the right thing to do. But for you, it has been. And so you've been in a hospital and you started caring for other people. So this whole time, were the children coming to see you on a daily basis, or how did that pan out? Because being in a hospital, and you kind of want to see kids, but then you don't necessarily want them in that hospital environment, because how does that affect? How was that on a practical level for you?
Well, the hospital had never had children in ICU at all. They just steered away from it. It's that risk of infection and what have you. For both parties, for them visiting and you know, and for people already in there. And they knew that at one point during my medication that I had, you could have had plasmapheresis, where you're washing the blood and sending it through like they do with cancer patients, or you
Right.
could have had IVIG, so that's intravenous immunoglobulins, which I don't profess to know much about, but that's what it was called. And I had the first set of that failed, and they were looking to airlift me to Nottingham, which was further away.
Right.
Away from my family. I wouldn't have known anyone there. It would have made everything harder. But the power of family or loved ones, or whether that's friends or whoever, is really, really, they recognise the importance. So they stayed and they did the phone. They did it by phone. They got the advice by phone. We're going to deal with it now. What else should we do? And they worked with Nottingham Hospital, which is the Centre for Neurological, in the Midlands. It's the Midlands Central unit. So they did that by phone. And they then really appreciated how bad it was. They put photographs of my children on my bed. They'd asked my husband to bring them in. I got that, and I got my cat. Well, my cat was never going to win. He was never going to get in, but I missed him desperately. And they said, we appreciate that the girls, it would do you good to see your girls and do them good. So they put me in a bed that was near the entrance. There was an entrance for people and an entrance for stretchers. And they put me near that entrance, so the bay that was nearest there. So the girls came in that way, and they went to see children's ICU first. They planned it with the children's team. The children's team took them to a normal ward to see how children cope in hospitals without mummy and daddy. They then saw ICU to see what types of things children might go through there. They played games with things. They had all sorts of bits and games and technology they could play with. And then they said when they were calm and ready, right, should we go and find mummy now? So they took them through all the corridors and took them up to come and see me. And they came at the time. They were sort of saying I was coping well on my tracheostomy. So in his infinite wisdom, the specialist came in and took out my trache box and put in a speech valve. Unfortunately, I sounded like Pinky and Perky, if we're old enough to remember that, but very high-pitched voice. So it was really awful, and you had to cover it and hold it and then speak. So a bit like what Christopher Reeve would have gone through when he had something similar, and it scared the girls. It really scared them. The bed was wide enough for the girls to each get on one side, so they lowered the bars to get the girls onto the bed, and they hugged me, and they managed to move my arms so that I'd got space for them to get in, and did all that. And they just sat there and they were very, very quiet, not knowing what to say. And I love you, mummy, and and come home soon, and massive. And then they just couldn't cope anymore, so they went back to children's and played in children's until their aunt, my husband's sister, was there, and he was there. I had this chance to talk. Well, that was enough for me. So I was holding my valve and sort of saying, "Thank you for understanding. Thank you for bringing them. Thank you for this." But little by little, they wanted to see me again, and and when my trachea came out, they certainly wanted to see me. So it was, they were harassing Dad to go, "Can you bring this again?" But definitely every weekend.
Brilliant.
And then I think maybe one night in the week, if he could manage it, because there was school, there was home, there was baths, there was bed, there was food, there was trying to tidy up, which that was the bit he didn't achieve.
Does it matter, really?
They just wanted to be with me. So they'd come and they'd bring things, and by the time I'd left, I looked more like I'd been on a 3-week holiday abroad, because I'd got so much bits and colorings and cards and and I had my birthday. I had a big birthday in hospital. My 40th was in hospital, and the nursing staff made it so good. So I was facilitated hugely, and they said it had done them good to understand how children would react and what the steps were. So they were going to put in a program to help with people with long-term care, that how they could sort of get children in safely and what needed to happen, and it would be maybe a 2-minute visit, but it would be something. So it really helped.
So your adversity, your issue with Guillian Barre really meant that the hospital were able to up their game in so many different ways, thanks to Kerry Willmott being a patient.
There's something like that, I guess. I never really thought, but I just wanted it to be. I just wanted to be the most positive time. I didn't want to tell them what to do. I needed help, and it's how you talk to people and how they understand. Lots of the nurses didn't get Guillian Barre. They'd heard of it and they talked about it like they did, but then they'd be shouting and, how are you? Are you okay? I'm not deaf. I'm
Not
not
deaf, not
an
stupid. My
yeah,
brain is working
exactly.
fine.
They didn't
Yeah.
get it.
Yeah,
So it
but
took
but
time.
this is why I wanted you to talk about this, because recognizing that you can make changes even as a patient, you can ask for what you want, but it's how you go about it, isn't it? And it's making that network, it's having conversations with the nurses and getting to know them, and not being the model patient, but not being a blooming moaning pain in the arse either. It's kind of having that happy medium so that you can create and build as you can. It's not really networking, but it's kind of like it. If you've done networking, it's really good to learn great communication skills. And obviously in your job you had good communication skills anyway, which really came to the fore. So tell us now, so you were out and you did get rid of the husband and you sorted out hopefully the whole financial stuff, and so now, how, just let people put in the picture, how long ago was this, and tell people, how are you now in terms of your health?
This was 13 years ago, so this was 2010.
Right.
So it's been a long journey, both physically and emotionally.
Yeah.
That said, when I'd come out and I'd fought my boss and said, I'm going to keep this job and this is going to happen, and he listened to me, and I spoke to, because I had links with solicitors and people through the job that I do quite naturally, they were gobsmacked and said they wouldn't have touched it with a barge pole. They were surprised they'd even tried it and
Right.
everything else. So it was lovely to know that, I would have been protected and there would have been avenues to go down. But I then took the company, the work I was doing with people development, then got noticed in a local magazine, a local press. We'd done a bit of look at what we're doing. We've got all this structure here that I'd put in place. I was then approached by a company who were some kind of body for excellent foods. And they said, we have a national award ceremony, we'd like you to apply. And I was just little me, I'm just me. And long story short, we won that. We went to a national ceremony down in Birmingham, and I won a huge award for the company. It's the first one they'd ever won. And it wasn't sales, it wasn't marketing, it was me. And I won that for them. So I was in big glossy magazines and goodness knows what else. I was completely shocked. Won that and then said, okay, now we need to sit down and do a deal because I'm going to go on and move on. And I did. I've done several different things. I work in HR, health and safety, and learning and development, whether it's bite-sized chunks or whether it's big stuff. Sometimes it's come in and run a department for a while. We've got this restructure going on. Can you help us? Sometimes it's put this new thing in. Sometimes it's leading managers or leadership's capable stuff. Sometimes it's put a policy in. Sometimes it's do an assessment of our health and safety. Where are we at? What do we need? There's all sorts of things that go on. But I was getting, with corporate, I was getting a lot of, oh, you've got these great skills and we've heard a lot about you. Come down and do this. We're not going to pay you a lot. Come and work for us. And I'm not demanding of I want enough just to look after my children and be happy. But we're talking, we'll do this, this, and this. One company took me on for two, like a dual role. I ended up doing 4 different roles, and I thought,
Naughty.
this is not. Yes, it was naughty. Yeah, I think that's probably. And I felt like I was being used, and it hurt. I'm not demanding I want more money, but this hurts because you're using every skill I've got, and yet you don't want to pay me. And there were some glib comments made. So the long story short, eventually I made a very brave decision that I needed the girls' mindset to be better. We'd gone through divorce. I needed them to be stronger. My youngest, well, they both suffered quite very, very much, but my youngest has shown it and has tried to take her life twice. So I've had a really tough time with that. So I've set up my own business to be me. Now that's scary because I have this anxiety with money, given what my ex-husband put me through. But to do the bite-sized chunks, to get the diversity, to have time with them, to work hard. I still seem to work, all the hours God sends, but I'm here with them. I can be a little more flexible for them. And it's me, and it allows me to go in and be with companies for what they need, and we do things. We don't try and rush. If they want something done quickly, we can do that, but we also understand why and what the impacts are, and this is what it's going to do, and this is for you. You are you as a business. You are not them. I don't compare one to another. Unless they've got a competitor, and then you think, okay, what's the competitor doing that we can do better? And we have fun with it. And that's the whole thing. I work with other people, I'll do collaborations and all sorts of things like that, if that's what we need. But it's about the right thing for the right people at the right time, rather than just, it's taught me to see things as somebody's individual. Not all food companies need this, all IT companies need that. It's about you, and it's about the people, it's about the mindset.
Absolutely. And this is so important, isn't it, Kerry? Because no matter what we're talking about, whether we're talking about health or a business or finances or a relationship, it doesn't really matter what the topic is. We need to be really, really focused on what is required by the individual, what is going to be helpful to people. And we are not the same. We don't all require the same stuff, but there are going to be certain things that as humans, we definitely do need to help our journey become just easier all around. And for you, you've got a gift of being able to use your humor, your experiences, to be able to see within companies what is needed that the people in the companies can't see for themselves. And that's what makes you such a special human, because not everybody has that gift. And the very fact that it's been powered by your desire to feel good enough means that you start to feel good about yourself. But because of that, you help people so much more than just any old other company could do.
That's right.
It's been such a joy to have you on. And I want to say thank you from the bottom of my heart for sharing some of the stuff that you've potentially not necessarily shared with anybody before, and being so open and honest and vulnerable about that experience. So if people have listened to this now and think, oh my God, I need a bit of Kerry Willmott in my life, where can they find you? How do they get in touch with you?
Well, my website, I have to say, I am so much so for putting people first, that my showcase, I guess, if you want to call it that, is slow in the development, and that's because I'm too busy giving to people who want my services rather than anything else.
We don't care about websites.
So I want to have a website just to sort of say, put me on the map, if you like, because I don't always have time for lots of networking. So I am Biscotti Limited. Biscotti was a word my children couldn't say. They couldn't say spaghetti, so it was Biscotti, and Biscotti is, so it's all about my children, where we have two pink dots on the eyes in Biscotti. Nice. That signifies my girls, and it's about unraveling. So you can see my necklace here. It's about having all that mess in that happens sometimes. It doesn't mean to, but it just does. And it's about unraveling and making things slicker for people, and helping them facilitate. So you can find me at hello@biscotti.co.uk. Nice. If you look up Biscotti, it does say website and develop, and I have homework I have to do for my website builder, so I'm trying to get that
on
done.
LinkedIn, social media, people connect with you there, can't they?
Definitely on LinkedIn, yes. It's again not under Biscotti, but under Kerry Willmott.
Under Kerry Willmott.
Yes, excellent. I have blonde hair there, and I'm naturally a brunette. It changes, so I might change it back to the brunette photograph.
But if they look for Kerry Willmott and they look for the name Biscotti, they're not going to go far wrong. They're going to find you. Kerry, I want to say thank you so much, and watch this space, because Kerry's going to be doing all kinds of things, I am certain. Thank you so much for listening, folks. This has been Raw Chatter, and we have got fairly deep and raw on this one today. I hope you've had some takeaways. If this has not resonated with you, but you do know somebody who will benefit from listening to this episode, please do let them know about it. And if you haven't already subscribed to our channel, please do. We would love you to help spread the word. And remember, we only have one body as far as we know. Take care of it, because it takes care of you. Bye-bye for now. Have a good one.